Hi, morning. So I wanted to put together a little video to explain further law, section A, the nature of law, and me and Lady thought we would just take you through a little introduction to this part of the exam. So it's the very last topic that we choose to study because it's synoptic. What that means is that we take everything from the past 2 years and you use it in this part of the paper. Now, for that reason, when I've taught this in the past, students have found it quite easy because you can use any example that you can think of. There isn't really any limits. And because of that, last summer, we saw quite a few students score highly on this part of the paper, as long as they followed some pretty key rules, which I just wanted to go through. So section A, yeah, that bit. Section A, the nature of law, is worth 25% of the final paper. So it's out of 25. So it's the equivalent of the lawmaking and legal system parts of the paper. So for that reason in the exam, you'll see it is a very similar layout. You have 30 minutes to answer and you'll have a choice of 2 essays. So again, you have a choice on this part of the paper. So whereas the section A on the other 2 papers has a 10-mark describe question and a 15-mark discuss question, this is one single 25 marker, which you have 30 minutes on. So you put the AO1, knowledge and understanding, and the AO3, the analysis and evaluation, together. You'll also find that has an asterisk. So if you remember, that means your answer needs to have a conclusion. And remember, your conclusion guides the levels. So for level 4, you need a valid conclusion. Even for basic, you need a basic conclusion. So if you don't have a conclusion, technically, your answer's limited. Isn't that right, Lady? Yes. So you want to make sure you get that. So the key with this is that there is a little bit of new learning, which is in your handouts. Although if you study subjects like politics, religious studies, sociology, you might be familiar with some of the concepts that you're going to see in this handout. There is a little bit of new learning, and that is your AO1. So for AO1 here, we're not really describing the law anymore. Oh, we're not too keen on the glass table, are we? She's never usually allowed up here, so this is a bit of a treat. For the AO1, you explain the theories, the theorists, the different sides of arguments. For the AO3, you have to analyse and support, critique those arguments with cases, with laws, with situations that you've studied over the last 2 years. So this pulls together all of the topics, all of the units that you've studied. So you can use examples from criminal law, from tort law, from contract law. You can also use any examples that you see from human rights law, because that's the other part of this paper that we don't study, but you can use human rights examples if you've come across any in the news or in your textbook reading. You also need to use examples from lawmaking and legal system. So that makes this a really broad paper. If you want to get those high levels, if you want to be getting excellent, if you want to get wide-ranging discussions, then you do need to talk about topics from across the whole exam. So what we sometimes saw in the summer was candidates were getting slightly more limited answers, still good marks, but not as good as they could have, because they didn't include more areas. They were focusing all on criminal law because, I mean, that's quite easy. So if you're wanting to get the higher answers, you need to think wider. And I'll give you sort of some little tips on what to do with that. So with this paper, if you have your handout with you, this covers 4 broad areas. It also covers the introduction to law, which is what I want us to focus on in lesson 1 this week. Just reminding ourselves a bit of the system and the states of law. And I'm hoping this should be fairly easy because, of course, you've been studying law for 2 years now. You're the best law students you'll ever be in college now. You've studied everything that you need to know so far. So on page 2, it explains the things which make up this. So the 4 main areas that you have to study are law and morality. So does law reflect society's morals? and should it, which is two slightly different questions. Law and justice, so you need to look at what justice actually means, and also examples of where the law has provided justice and also times where it's failed. We have to look at law and society, so how the law tries to balance everybody. Oh, we've got a bit of an itch. How the law tries to balance everybody in society. Does it do it fairly? Does law act as a social control? So is the only reason that we're not going around looting because of law? And what's the judge's parts to play in creating law? Do they actually create law? We know that their role means they're not supposed to, but do they? And we also look at law and technology. So how does the law impact on technology, and how has technology impacted on the law? So how has a solicitor's office changed since the 1800s, for example? And you can imagine with emails, with computers, that's absolutely huge. And also, how has the law tried to keep up with technology? So, for example, we have all these issues that we never used to have, like cybercrime. How are we dealing with that? So if you have a look in your handout, it does explain a little bit about the system. If you have a look on page 3, I've created a PowerPoint to help you go through these. But thinking about the different categories and about the different ways that we discuss law. So on page 3, for example, what are the different categories of law? So you have the difference between procedural and substantive law. So the laws that make up our legal procedures, and then the laws that are actually the laws we follow, like crime, tort, family, employment, contract, etc. And then we also have public and private laws. So public laws are the ones that, I suppose, regulate our relationship with the state. So we're mostly looking at criminal law and our human rights, because human rights law is against the state, generally speaking. And then we also have private laws, which regulate the relationships between us as individuals. So, for example, employment law regulates the relationship between you and your employer. Landlord and tenant law, it regulates the relationship with your landlord. Contract, obviously. Tort law, ones we've studied. You've also got the different aims of criminal and civil law, and I hope the questions on the PowerPoint help you go through those. And these are really, really key questions that I'm hoping you can answer quite easily, but just thinking about the relationships between them. I filled out where we get some of our laws from. So laws have developed in this country from lots of different places. We don't have like a single written constitution. I think lady's snoring now, which is helpful. Clearly putting her to sleep. So you've got all different types of laws that come from equity, from custom, from acts of parliament, from common law. But think about the other places that we get law from in England as well. Little hint, we may not get laws from one of them for much longer, for example. And then you've got the differences between common law and civil law systems. So places like China, Japan, France, Germany, they have a very different legal system, and there's a bit about there. But what's important here is just something called the rule of law. Now, this is one of your British values, so you should know this, especially when I'm being observed. But essentially, the rule of law has 3 key ideas. So first off, you should not be punished unless it's in accordance with the law. So you shouldn't be punished unless you break the law. We all should be treated equally in front of the law. So no one should get special treatment, for example, but at the same time, no one should be disadvantaged. And also the law has to be fair and clear to everybody. And that basically guards us against dictatorship. It holds the government to account for the things that we do. It also means separation of powers. So we have checks on government, for example, the judges. There's a few key theorists there. Dicey is kind of the main one that looked at the rule of law, but there's a couple of others in your handout. And then just the bottom is for you to think of ways where we have seen those 3 key principles in the rules that we studied so far. Where have we seen the idea that you shouldn't be punished without a fair trial, that you should be treated equally and the law should be clear? So, for example, I'll give you a couple of little hints. When it comes to criminal procedures, trial by jury is really quite important. When it comes to suing somebody, the idea that the system should be accessible and affordable, whether that's still the case. Human rights law, the idea that it needs to be fair and our country's law needs to be fair. Criminal law, So the idea that everybody is entitled to a trial, and you can't just be punished without being found or pleading guilty. Contract law should be fair and clear, so the courts take a laissez-faire approach. And tort law, the idea that you can claim compensation from someone to put you back in the position you were in if you've been done wrong to. So have a look at up to page 6 with those introductory concepts to get a feel for what this topic is about. Have a flick through the other pages. What I'm going to do with this topic is I'm going to let you explore the handout. The handouts are quite independent anyway, and then what I want to do is just try and do a kind of rough summary sheet for each of those topics to tie everything together at the end. I hope that makes sense. I'm going to try and stop the video now. I don't think she's going to be super impressed. Lady, say bye to everyone. Bye. Not impressed. See you soon.